Have you ever seen concrete being poured? What was it like? Welcome to another Bernica video. This video is for civil engineers and those who work in the field of construction. It's aimed at teaching some vocabulary and phrases related to concrete, and it's meant to improve your English. Let's start with a question again. Have you ever seen concrete being poured? What was it like? I want to teach you two words here. One is massive. Massive is something that's in large amounts, in large numbers, or very large in size. Very large in size or amount. That's something that's massive. So imagine a massive amount of concrete, for example. You need a massive amount of concrete for foundation. That's the first word I wanted to teach you. The next one is mixture. The word mixture is a combination of different things. You can have a mixture, which is the concrete that you have. It's a mixture of sand, gravel, and cement and water, and it mixtures. So that's the word mixture. It's a combination of different things. Now, what I would like to encourage you to do is to pause the video at this point and try to answer the question that we have using those two words, massive and mixture. Again, the question is, have you ever seen concrete being poured and what was it like? Now, let's read our response here. Yes, I have. Watching concrete being poured was fascinating. The workers used a massive truck to pour the mixture into forms, and it flowed like thick mud. They quickly leveled and smoothed it before it began to set. The entire process seemed like a well-coordinated dance. So it's talking about how a massive truck is used. It's a mixer truck. And about how the concrete looked like a thick mud. Basically mud that is very thick, not it's very viscous. It doesn't flow easily. And then it talks about the leveling and smoothing of the surface of the finish of concrete. But I'm going to read it part by part now and teach you the words there. Yes, I have. Watching concrete being poured was fascinating. So the word fascinating means extremely interesting, beautiful, nice, amazing, fascinating. For example, watching the concrete pour was fascinating due to precision involved. Due to the precision involved, yes, you need to consider a lot of precision, and that's a fascinating thing. The workers used a massive truck to pour the mixture into forms. So what is forms? What are forms? These are the molds that you use to pour concrete inside them. The name already suggests you want to form the concrete into any shape you like, so you need to use forms. A form, I think we have a definition here. Not from this one, maybe in the next one. But a form is basically the whole mold, the structure that we use, usually wooden, to shape the concrete into any final form we want. Anyways, a massive truck. We already talked about the word massive. It means very large in size. We can read an example. A massive truck was used to deliver the concrete to the construction site. And it flowed like thick mud. It flowed. Flow is the movement. Any liquid can, or any mixture that is liquid-like, it can flow, it can move. For example, the concrete flowed smoothly into the forms set up by the workers. And like thick mud, so we have the word thick. Thick is heavy or dense or sticky, not flowing easily. For example, the concrete was thick, making it difficult to pour but essential for creating a strong foundation. Yeah, that's one of the things we have to consider when we talk about concrete, because there is something called water to cement ratio. And if you work with less than 50% of water to cement ratio, then it's not going to be very fluid. It's not going to move easily. So sometimes we use plasticizers and other stuff to make the concrete flow more easily. If the concrete is very thick, it might create a stronger concrete. You might get a final better compression strength. But the problem is you may also see a lot of issues with it, like it cannot flow easily. You might have a lot of air bubbles. So you need to strike a balance. It's like a walking a fine line there. Anyways, we're talking about the thickness of concrete here. And also we had the word mud. Mud is wet, soft earth. For example, the concrete mixture looked like thick mud before it started to set. And then what else do we have here? They quickly leveled and smoothed it before it began to set. So they leveled it. To level is to make something flat or even. You need to level the surface of the concrete. For example, the workers had to level the concrete quickly before it began to harden. Before concrete hardens, you need to level it. And the other word is set. When we talk about concrete, when we say concrete set, it sets. It means it becomes firm or solid. The concrete began to set within minutes of being poured, as an example. And the whole process seemed like a well-coordinated dance. A well-coordinated dance means something that's organized in a very beautiful way. For example, the team performed a well-coordinated task of pouring and smoothing the concrete. All right, let's have a quick review of the things we learned here. We learned the words fascinating, which is amazing, interesting, extremely interesting, massive. Massive is very huge. It's huge or very big. Mixture is a combination of different things. Flow is to move along in a stream. Thick means viscous. It means something that doesn't move easily. It's heavy, it's dense. And mud is wet, soft earth. Level is to make something flat. Set, when we talk about concrete, when we say it sets, it means it starts to become solid. And well-coordinated dance. Another word that we talked about but is not in this list is form. Yeah, you pour concrete into forms, and then it starts to set. All right, let's have a quick pause, and then we'll continue with our second response. Before continuing to our second response, I want to teach you two words. One is vibrate. You probably already know this, and you know how important a vibration is for forming concrete, for pouring concrete. And the other word is air bubble. Air bubbles are small pockets of air that's trapped inside concrete. If you vibrate the concrete, then you will release those air bubbles. And it can add to the strength of concrete. It makes it a much better stone. So what we want to do is we want to use those two words, vibrate and air bubble, to talk about if we've seen concrete being poured and what it was like. So you might want to pause the video at this point to practice your speaking of English and use those two words, air bubble and vibrate, to talk about if you've seen concrete being poured and what it was like. Assuming you've already done that, I'm going to read our response here. I have. Again, this is the answer to the question, have you seen concrete being poured? I have, and it was really interesting to see. The concrete was poured from a large chute into wooden forms. The workers used tools to spread it evenly and then vibrated it to remove any air bubbles. It was surprisingly quick, but you could tell where they were careful with every step. Okay, so I'm going to read it part by part now. It means I have done this, I have seen it, and it was really interesting to see. The concrete was poured from a large chute. So what is a chute? A chute is a sloping channel or slide for conveying things to a lower level. If you want to move something from a higher level to a lower level, usually liquid or a mixture, you can use a chute. It's a slope that allows liquids to move. So it's a sloping channel or slide for conveying things to a lower level. As an example, the concrete was poured through a chute into the foundation forms. Okay, the workers used tools to spread it evenly. You want to spread the concrete evenly. To spread it evenly, spread is to distribute over an area. For example, the workers spread the concrete evenly to ensure a flat surface. The thing you need to remember about the word spread is that as a verb, the past form is irregular. It's the same thing. Today I spread the concrete. Yesterday I spread the concrete. The form doesn't change when you go into the past. It's an irregular verb. So the workers spread the concrete evenly to ensure a flat surface. And here is where we have the word forms. Yes, wooden forms. In our previous response, we also talked about forms. A form is a mold or frame into which concrete is poured. You pour concrete into molds or into forms. For example, wooden forms were set up to shape the concrete as it hardened. The hardening of concrete. As it hardens, wooden forms are set up to make the shape. All right. Spread it evenly. We also have the word evenly, which means in a even manner, in a equal manner. Then vibrate it to remove any air bubbles. You also know about the word vibrate and air bubble, as I said before. It was surprisingly quick. You could tell they were careful with every step. So here's the tricky thing about the word tell. Usually it means to say something to someone. That's the word tell, like I told you. But here it has a rather different meaning. You could tell they were careful. Tell here means you could understand, you could recognize, you could notice. So tell means to recognize or identify something. For example, you could tell that the concrete was starting to set by the way it hardened on the surface. So if I ask you, how can you tell if concrete is hardening, or how can you tell if concrete is starting to set? And you say, just look at it, just like dip your finger in it and you'll see and you'll tell. It means you'll understand, you'll recognize that it is setting because of the hardening that happens on the surface. So that's the word tell. As we see in this text, it has a rather different meaning than what we are usually used to. Let's have a quick review of the vocabulary here. We have the word shoot. As we said, it's a slope to move liquids. A form, which is the mold into which you pour concrete. Spread is to distribute over an area. Vibrate, air bubbles, and tell. Now let's take a look at our next response. For our next response, I think I can first teach you the word chaotic. Chaotic. Chaotic is messy, disorganized, crazy, something that's not very organized. It's chaotic. In a state of complete confusion and disorder. So if you have disorder, something is disorganized, you can say it's very chaotic. So imagine a construction site. I imagine sometimes it can be described as a chaotic place. And another word you can use here is foundation. I suppose you already know foundation is the base or support on which something stands. Every building has a foundation. The building is on top of the foundation. The loads from the building are moved to the ground using the foundation. So those two words, chaotic and foundation. Maybe you can pause the video again and talk about whether you've seen concrete being poured and what it was like, and try to use these two words. Now I'm going to read the response. Yes, I saw it at a construction site. The concrete was poured into a foundation for a new building. It was a bit chaotic with all the machinery and workers, but once the concrete was in place, they quickly started smoothing it out. It was impressive to see how quickly it all came together. All right, so let's review it. Yes, I saw it at a construction site. The concrete was poured into a foundation for a new building. Yeah, they were pouring concrete into the forms of a foundation. It was a bit chaotic. It was a bit chaotic. It was a little disorganized. Chaotic is in a state of complete confusion or disorder. For example, the construction site was chaotic with the noise and movement, but the workers knew exactly what they were doing. Also, we have the word construction site here. I think you know it. It's the place where you're doing some construction, the place where you're building something. That place is your construction site. The concrete was poured into a foundation for a new building. It was a bit chaotic with all the machinery and workers, but once the concrete was in place, here we have the word once. It's another interesting word that has a different meaning than what you usually think. Normally, once means one time, like once, twice, thrice, like one time, two times, three times. But here, the word once means at the moment when something happens. At the moment when something happens. For example, be sure to wash the dishes once you get home. Or be sure to turn off the lights once you leave your home. So it means at the moment when you leave your home. Once is at the moment when something happens. And here it says, but once the concrete was in place, they quickly started smoothing it out. So once means at the moment when something happens. For example, once the concrete is mixed, it must be poured quickly. Okay, it's obvious. Once the concrete is mixed, it must be poured quickly. I think in most cases you have under an hour to pour the concrete mix. Otherwise, it will start to set. But you can also use some admixtures to delay the process of setting. But normally you should try to pour the concrete in less than an hour or 45 minutes, where I live, considering the temperature. Okay, next one. Once it was in place means correctly positioned. For example, once the concrete was in place, the workers began smoothing it out. All right, so smooth out. Smooth out is to make a surface flat or even. You smooth out the surface of concrete. The workers used trowels to smooth out the freshly poured concrete. And what else do we have here? It was impressive to see how quickly it all came together. Come together means to start working or happening successfully. Everything comes together. At the beginning, it was chaotic. At the end, everything came together. At the end, it was not chaotic. Everything was working successfully. For example, the project started to come together after the concrete was poured. So those were the things we learned here. We learned the word chaotic, which is disorganized. Machinery, which is machines collectively. Once, which means at the moment when something happens. Foundation, obviously. In place, correctly positioned, smooth out, and come together. So far in this video, we've learned two words which have rather confusing meanings. One was the word tell, because normally tell means to say something, but here we learned that it means to recognize or understand something. And the other one was once. Usually it means one time, but here it means at the moment when something happens. Let's continue with our next response. For this response, we're going to learn a couple of words. One is spread. We've used the word spread before in this video. Spread, you need to distribute the concrete over an area. So that's spreading the concrete. For example, the workers spread the concrete using specialized tools. That's the first word for this video. And the other one is evenly. Evenly is in a smooth, equal, or uniform way. When you spread the concrete, you need to make sure that the surface is spread evenly. The concrete was spread evenly across the surface to prevent any weak spots, is the example here. So spread and evenly. Now you can pause the video, use those two words, spread and evenly, to talk about if you've seen concrete being poured and what it was like. Now I'm going to read it for you. Yes, and it was really something to watch. They poured the concrete into the foundation for a bridge. The mix was thick and heavy, and they used a special machine to spread it evenly. The whole process was precise, and you could see the workers' expertise in how they handled it. Now, I'm going to read it part by part. Yes, and it was really something to watch. It means it was really interesting. It was really something. It was really something to watch. They poured the concrete into the foundation for a bridge. So they're making the foundation for a bridge. They poured the concrete into the foundation for a bridge. The mix was thick and heavy, so it was viscous. It wasn't moving so fluidly. It was thick and heavy, and they used a special machine to spread it evenly. They wanted to spread it evenly. Spread is to distribute, and evenly is in a smooth, equal, and uniform way. The whole process was precise. Precise means marked by exactness and accuracy. If you need to do something in a very exact way, you're doing it in a precise way. So precise is exact and accurate. For example, the pouring of the concrete was a precise operation to avoid any mistakes. If you want to avoid any mistakes, the whole process of pouring concrete needs to be very precise. And you could see the workers' expertise. Expertise is your expert skill or knowledge in a particular field. For example, the workers' expertise was evident in how smoothly the concrete was handled. If you handle the concrete in a smooth way, here I'm not just talking about smooth surface. In a smooth way means in a nice way, without interruptions, without problems. Then it shows the worker's expertise. Let's take a look at an interesting point here. The apostrophe is used after workers, not before the S. Like usually we say worker, apostrophe S, to show that something belongs to a worker. But here, first we have the S and then the apostrophe. And it's because we're talking about multiple workers, not just one worker, but workers. And you don't need a double S. You just use one S, the plural S, and then the apostrophe to show possession. Let's continue in how they handled it. And handle is to manage something, to deal with something. For example, the team handled the concrete with care to ensure a smooth pour. A smooth pour is a good and uninterrupted and an okay pouring of the concrete. All right, I think we can continue with our fifth response. But first, let's learn some vocabulary. One is the word strip. Strip is a long, narrow piece of something. If you consider a foundation is usually made up of strips that are connected to each other. A strip connected to another strip, so that makes a foundation for you. Lots of strips interconnected. So a strip is a long, narrow piece of something. And another word is set. We've seen it before, but it's good to practice in this text also. The word set, when it's used for concrete, it means to become firm or solid. I think for concrete, it usually takes 24 to 48 hours for the concrete to set. There's initial set and then the hardening that comes after. So set is to become firm or solid. And strip is a narrow, long piece of something. Now, I want you to pause the video at this point and use those two words, narrow and set, to talk about if you've seen concrete being poured and what it was like. Now, I'm going to read it for you. I did at a road construction site. The concrete was poured in long strips to form the road surface. Workers used machines to level it out, and it was amazing to see how quickly they had to work before the concrete started to set. It was a well-coordinated effort. So it's talking about a road construction site, but we can also talk about strips of a foundation as well. The concrete was poured in long strips to form the road surface. We already talked about strip. It's a long, narrow piece of something. For example, the concrete was poured in strips to create the road. Workers used machines to level it out. To level it out is to make the surface flat. For example, the concrete was leveled using a machine designed for road construction. Let's continue. And it was amazing to see how quickly they had to work before the concrete started to set. Set is to become firm or solid. The concrete had to be leveled before it started to set. It was a well-coordinated effort, obviously. And also we have the word surface, which is the outside part or uppermost layer of something. For example, the concrete surface was smoothed out to ensure a flat road. Okay, let's learn some other vocabulary and answer the question again. Here we can learn the word pump. To pump something is to move something from one place to another. Especially it's used for liquids, like you can pump concrete. And the more water you use, the easier it gets to pump the concrete. But obviously, it's not good for the strength that you can have from this. The other word is by hand. By hand is manually, not using machines. So maybe you can now talk about if you've seen concrete being poured and use those two words, by hand and pump. Pump can also be a noun, like a device that you use to pump the concrete, but it can be also be the verb. Now I'm going to read it, assuming that you've paused the video and you've already tried yourself. Yes, and it was quite the process. The concrete was being poured to create the foundation for a building. The workers used a pump to move the concrete into place, and then they leveled it by hand. It was hard work, but they did it with such precision and speed. All right, so let's review. Yes, and it was quite the process. I like this vocabulary here. It was quite the process. When you say something is quite the something, it means you're making, you're emphasizing the point. Like, it was quite the movie. It means it was an amazing movie. And it was quite the process means it was an amazing process. So quite the something means it's used to emphasize that something is remarkable or impressive. So it shows impressiveness and being remarkable. For example, the construction of the concrete structure was quite the achievement for the crew. The crew are the people who work at a place. So it was quite the achievement for them to construct the concrete structure. Let's continue. Yes, and it was quite the process. The concrete was being poured to create the foundation for a building. The workers used a pump to move the concrete into place. As we said, pump is a device used to move fluids, gases, or sometimes slurries by mechanical action. A pump used to deliver the concrete into the forms. A pump was used to deliver the concrete into the forms. And then they leveled it by hand. We talked about leveling a lot in this video. It's to make something flat. For example, after pouring, the concrete was leveled by hand for a smooth surface. So that's where you can use the word by hand. You can level the concrete by hand. And the phrase by hand, we already talked about it. It means manually, not using machines. For example, the workers leveled the concrete by hand to ensure precision. And it was hard work. Obviously, hard work is something that's difficult, but they did it with such precision. Precision is the quality of being exact and accurate. For example, the precision required in pouring concrete is critical to ensure a strong foundation. That's it. That was everything we wanted to learn. Let's have a quick review of some of the things we've learned. We learned the word once, which means at the moment when something happens. For example, you can start thinking about the finished surface once the concrete is poured. It means at the time or when it happens. We had the word tell, which usually means to say something, but here it means to recognize or understand something. For example, I can tell if a concrete structure is good quality just by seeing it. You can just look at the concrete and you can tell if it is good quality. It means you can understand, you can recognize. Kind of like people, like, if you see someone who's sick, in most cases, you don't need a machine, a device to scan their body to tell that they're sick. Just by looking at them, sometimes you recognize that they're sick. The same thing is true with concrete. Sometimes just by looking at concrete, you can tell that it's not okay. Obviously, some other times you need exact devices, but sometimes you can just tell by a visual inspection, just by looking at it. So that was the word tell once. We also learned the phrase quite the something. For example, it was quite the movie. It was quite the show. It means it was amazing. It was remarkable. We talked about leveling the surface and set, the concrete setting. It means that it starts to become solid. We talked about the chute, which is a slope on which you can move liquids. About the strips, we talked about the strips of foundation, and we also talked about chaotic. We said that sometimes construction sites can be a little bit chaotic, disorganized. You need to be very careful. And air bubbles. By vibrating concrete, you can release the air bubbles and increase its strength, the final strength that you can expect from concrete. All right, that's it. I think that's basically most of the things we wanted to learn. We reviewed most of those words. I hope this has been helpful. And that's it. I wish you a good day.